When Jasmine Crockett leaned forward in that congressional hearing, it wasn't to provoke or embarrass Pam Bondi. It was to remind her and everyone else watching that accountability has to mean something, especially when it comes from people who've spent their careers demanding it from others. For years, Pam Bondi had been seen as a sharp legal mind, a figure who spoke confidently about justice, fairness, and the rule of law. She had built her reputation as Florida's Attorney General by presenting herself as someone who stood on principle, unafraid to take tough positions. But in that moment, as Crockett began her quiet but firm line of questioning, Bondi realized that the same standards she had enforced on others could be turned toward her. Crockett didn't raise her voice or deliver a dramatic speech. Instead, she asked questions that peeled away at the layers of Bondi's statements. She brought up moments from Bondi's career-specific cases, public statements, and the decisions she defended in the name of justice. Each question was deliberate, tied directly to the larger issue at hand, whether those who had once wielded authority were now applying those same rules fairly when discussing others. The exchange wasn't about ideology or partisanship. It was about the principle of accountability. Crockett's tone made that clear. She wasn't attacking Bondi's political affiliations. She was challenging the consistency behind her beliefs. If you believe in fairness, Crockett said at one point, her tone measured, then fairness doesn't start when it's convenient, has to apply when it's uncomfortable too. Pam Bondi listened. There was a flicker of unease in her expression, a rare sight for someone who had long commanded the public stage with confidence. She began to answer, carefully, almost cautiously. She explained that decisions made during her time in office were complex, that the context of each situation mattered, that the legal system required difficult calls, and she wasn't wrong, those things were true. But Crockett wasn't questioning the legality. She was questioning the balance. How could one speak of selective justice without acknowledging the moments in one's own past that raised similar concerns? That's where the conversation became more than just political theater. It turned into a moment of introspection. For Bondi, it was uncomfortable. For Crockett, it was necessary. Because real accountability isn't about punishing someone. It's about holding up a mirror and asking, are you living by the standards you ask others to uphold? In that hearing, Crockett's.com, but firm words served as that mirror. She reminded everyone that leadership without reflection becomes hypocrisy, and justice without self-examination becomes bias. She didn't accuse Bondi of corruption or wrongdoing. Instead, she pointed out the danger of selective memory, the kind that allows people to speak about integrity while sidestepping their own records. Observers later described the moment as a quiet dismantling. There were no raised voices, no personal attacks, just logic meeting its reflection. Crockett's composure was part of what made the exchange so memorable. She never looked angry, never seemed eager to win the conversation. She simply wanted truth to stand on equal ground. That's what accountability really is. It's not about defeating someone, but about demanding that the same standards apply universally. For Pam Bondi, it may have felt personal. She had spent years defending the law, interpreting fairness through her own experience and perspective. To have someone hold her past decisions up against her present words must have felt like a kind of reckoning. Yet, beneath the discomfort, there was something deeply human in it. Every person who has ever held a position of power eventually faces that same test. Can you stand by your principles when the light turns on you? Crockett's warning wasn't a threat, it was a truth told plainly. One day, she said quietly, the truth always catches up. Those words didn't echo with menace. They carried the weight of experience. Crockett, as a lawyer and lawmaker herself, understood that accountability isn't an act of hostility, it's an act of preservation. It's how institutions maintain credibility. It's how justice remains justice. The reason the moment resonated wasn't because one woman silenced another. It was because one reminded the other of something they both should stand for. Crockett wasn't speaking just to Bondi. She was speaking to the entire system that allows people to forget that fairness loses its meaning when it's only used as a weapon. For all her confidence, Bondi seemed momentarily taken aback. She didn't respond with the same force she often used in interviews or debates. Instead, she paused. And in that pause, the message landed. Accountability over argument, that's what Crockett had delivered. She didn't need to win the exchange. She only needed to make sure the idea couldn't be ignored. When Jasmine Crockett spoke that day, she didn't rely on volume or dramatics to make her point. She understood that sometimes most powerful message isn't delivered through force, it's delivered through control. Her composure was her strength, and in that congressional hearing with Pam Bondi, it became the defining element of the entire exchange. The cameras caught every subtle movement, every shift in tone, and what stood out most wasn't the words themselves, it was the way Crockett carried them. Calm, precise, and deliberate. Pam Bondi had entered that discussion as the confident, articulate figure many expected her to be. She was polished, professional, and well-prepared. Just as she had been in her days as Florida's Attorney General, she had spoken in countless interviews and hearings before, often with a commanding presence. But this time, she was seated across from someone who didn't match that energy with confrontation instead. Jasmine Crockett met it with quiet steadiness. That balance changed everything. When Bondi made her initial remarks about fairness and selective justice, her delivery was measured but assertive. She emphasized her belief that justice should never be influenced by political motives, that it should remain neutral and principled. But as she spoke, Crockett simply listened. She didn't interrupt or roll her eyes. She waited, nodding occasionally, jotting down notes. That restraint made the eventual moment of response far more effective than any rebuttal could have been. When Crockett finally began to speak, her tone was soft but firm, the kind that demands attention without needing to demand silence. She didn't frame her words as accusations, but as questions that carried weight because they were rooted in logic, not emotion. Ms. Bondi, she began, when you speak about the need for fairness, do you believe that applies to every person you've ever served under the law, or only to those who share your view of justice? It was a small question, but it lingered. Bondi, used to defending her statements with confidence, hesitated slightly before responding. The pause was noticeable. Crockett didn't fill the silence. She let it hang there, allowing the weight of her question to settle naturally. That silence was part of her composure. It gave her presence more gravity than any raised voice could have achieved. Observers later commented that what made Crockett's words so effective wasn't just their content but their delivery. She maintained unwavering eye contact, her hands folded calmly in front of her, her expression unreadable yet grounded. That demeanor created an atmosphere of quiet authority. Even those who disagreed with her couldn't deny that she commanded the moment. Pam Bondi tried to recover, answering with the confidence she was known for, explaining that her comments were about the importance of equal application of justice, regardless of political side. But Crockett's almost conversational tone contrasted sharply with Bondi's defensive edge. It was clear that Crockett had shifted the tone of the entire room not through intimidation, but through composure. Composure has a strange kind of power in moments of conflict. It draws people in rather than pushing them away. It allows the truth to breathe instead of suffocating under argument. Jasmine Crockett seemed to understand that perfectly. She didn't need to overpower Pam Bondi. She simply needed to remain centered while the conversation unfolded around her. That made her words resonate more deeply. At one point, Crockett leaned forward slightly and said, "The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it just needs someone calm enough to say it plainly." The room was silent after that, not out of tension, but out of reflection. There was something disarming about the way she spoke. It didn't feel like she was trying to win a debate. It felt like she was simply stating something everyone already knew but had been reluctant to admit. Pam Bondi, though visibly unsettled for a moment, didn't lash out or lose her composure either. She was seasoned enough to know that reacting too strongly would only reinforce the contrast between them. Still, she couldn't quite regain control of the tone. Crockett had said it, and once that quiet authority was established, it remained unshaken. In politics, people often equate dominance with loudness, but Crockett's performance that day proved the opposite. Her strength came from her ability to stay composed under pressure, to maintain poise even when the discussion grew uncomfortable. That restraint made her message stronger. It reminded everyone that sometimes the person who remains calm is the one truly in control. Those watching at home could feel it too. The moment was replayed across media outlets, not because someone shouted or lost their temper, but because one woman, sitting still and speaking softly, managed to turn the entire conversation on its head. Crockett didn't just make a point, she demonstrated one, that the power of composure can dismantle even the most practiced rhetoric, not through aggression, but through the quiet certainty of truth. When Pam Bondi sat across from Jasmine Crockett during that congressional hearing, she came into the room with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime commanding respect. She had been on national television, handled high-profile cases, and navigated the complex world of politics and law. But as the conversation unfolded, something unexpected happened. Crockett's pointed words caused Bondi to pause in a way that few had ever seen before. For a brief moment, her practiced composure cracked, not out of anger or defensiveness, but from reflection. It wasn't a moment of defeat. It was a mirror moment. Jasmine Crockett had a way of speaking that didn't provoke immediate argument. Instead, it provoked thought. When she questioned Bondi, her tone remained even, her expression patient, and her words carefully measured. "You've built a career on demanding accountability from others," she said softly. "But can any of us truly talk about justice if we've never questioned how our own decisions shaped it?" It was a simple question, but one that landed with remarkable weight. Bondi leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing for a second as she searched for the right response. She wasn't accustomed to being on the receiving end of that kind of scrutiny. She had been the one asking questions for years, the one making decisions that others had to justify. Yet now, as Crockett's words hung in the air, The focus had shifted. Bondi was no longer the enforcer of justice. In that moment, she was the subject of it. Asterisk, that's what made it so powerful. Crockett hadn't accused her of anything. She hadn't attacked or undermined her accomplishments. Instead, she had asked Bondi to consider something deeper, whether her version of fairness had ever been shaped by personal or political convenience. It wasn't a question meant to humiliate. It was meant to awaken, and for a moment, it did. Asterisk, Pam Bondi's silence said more than any rebuttal could have. The cameras caught the pause, the faint movement of her eyes downward, as if she were replaying certain memories in her mind. She eventually responded, her voice steady but a touch softer than before. She spoke about the complexities of leadership, the difficult decisions that come with holding public office, and how every choice made under pressure can be judged differently in hindsight. Asterisk, but even as she spoke, it was clear that Crockett's question had touched something real. There was no hostility in the room, just a quiet realization that everyone, regardless of status or reputation, faces moments when their own reflection becomes their greatest critic. Bondi wasn't being judged by the public in that instant. She was confronting herself. Asterisk, this was the mirror moment when the image of confidence meets the reality of conscience. For someone like Pam Bondi, who had long stood as a symbol of firmness and authority, it was a rare glimpse of introspection. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was a demonstration of what true accountability looks like, not forced, not performative, but honest. Asterisk, Crockett didn't push further. She didn't need to. She simply nodded as Bondi finished speaking, as if acknowledging that the point had already been made. It was never about winning the exchange, it was about creating space for truth to surface. The dignity in that moment was mutual. Bondi wasn't humiliated, and Crockett wasn't triumphant. Instead, there was something human in the silence that followed a recognition that self-awareness is often the most difficult form of accountability. Asterisk, the media later focused on that short pause, the brief second when Bondi seemed to lose her usual rhythm. Commentators replayed it repeatedly, interpreting it as shock or discomfort. But what many didn't see was the depth beneath it. It wasn't embarrassment. It was understanding. The kind of understanding that comes when someone holds up a mirror, and you can't look away from what you see. Asterisk, for Jasmine Crockett, the exchange was a success not because she had cornered a political figure, but because she had reminded everyone that integrity is not a fixed status, a practice. It requires looking inward just as often as outward. And for Bondi, the experience became an unspoken lesson in humility. Asterisk, there was something almost poetic about it. Two women from different political paths, both skilled in law and advocacy, meeting not in anger but in reflection. Crockett's.com presence allowed Bondi to lower her guard, even for just a moment, and in that space, truth revealed itself. The hearing may have ended, but that quiet realization lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Asterisk, sometimes the most transformative moments aren't the ones filled with applause or confrontation. They're the ones where someone forces you to see yourself clearly, to question your convictions, and to remember why you held them in the first place. For Pam Bondi, that moment didn't destroy her confidence, it deepened her awareness. And for Jasmine Crockett, it reaffirmed that the strongest form of accountability begins with reflection, not accusation. Asterisk. In the days following the hearing between Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett, clips of their exchange spread across television networks and social media. Yet what people kept returning to wasn't a heated clash or a dramatic moment. It was the subtle power of what the conversation revealed. Beneath the surface, there was a broader message unfolding, one that reached far beyond two women on opposite sides of a political aisle. It was about credibility, consistency, and the fragile trust the public places in those who speak about justice. Asterisk, Pam Bondi had long been known for her eloquence and firm stance on the law. She presented herself as a figure who believed deeply in fairness, in holding others accountable, and in protecting the principles that uphold democracy. That image had followed her through years of public service, and even beyond her time in office. But Jasmine Crockett, with her quiet yet piercing questions, managed to bring forward an uncomfortable truth that credibility isn't something you declare. It's something you earn through consistency. Asterisk, during the hearing, Crockett didn't set out to discredit Bondi. Instead, she asked questions that peeled away the protective layer of rhetoric that so often surrounds political conversations. When we talk about fairness, Crockett said softly, do we mean it only when it benefits us? Or are we willing to apply it when it challenges us too? The question wasn't meant as an attack, it was a reminder. And in that reminder, Crockett articulated something that resonated with anyone who had ever seen justice used as a talking point rather than a principle. Asterisk, Pam Bondi listened. Visibly processing the question, she responded with her usual clarity, emphasizing that justice should remain impartial, untouched by bias or political leaning. Yet Crockett's words hung in the air because they addressed something deeper than legal argument. They touched the essence of integrity itself. Asterisk, in that moment, the contrast between the two women wasn't about party or ideology, it was about perspective. Bondi represented experience, the voice of someone who had worked within the system for decades. Crockett represented accountability, the voice asking whether that system had truly lived up to its ideals. The balance between those two energies, the establishment and the reformer, created the tension that made their exchange so memorable. What the public saw that day wasn't just a disagreement, it was a lesson in how credibility is tested. It's easy to speak about justice when you're the one enforcing it. It's harder when you're asked to look back at your own record and measure it against the same standard. That's where many people felt the impact of Crockett's calm words. She wasn't trying to diminish Bondi's career. She was urging her to bridge the gap between what she said and what she once did. That broader message extended far beyond the hearing room. It touched the wider political landscape, a reminder that trust in leadership depends on authenticity. When words and actions no longer align, even the most respected figures begin to lose the credibility that once defined them. Crockett's chilling warning, as some later called it, wasn't about punishment or power. It was about preservation. She was, in essence, warning not just Pam Bondi, but every public figure who believes reputation alone can replace reflection. Pam Bondi, to her credit, didn't react defensively. Though visibly affected, she maintained professionalism, acknowledging the importance of fairness and agreeing that justice must always be held to the same measure. But for those who watched closely, the tone of her voice changed. It was subtle, less rehearsed, more thoughtful. In that shift, viewers could sense that Crockett's message had landed where it was meant to. The interaction became a kind of symbol for how meaningful conversations about accountability should look: firm but respectful, critical but grounded in truth. Crockett didn't use emotion to overpower logic, nor did she exploit Bondi's silence for political points. Instead, she let the message speak for itself. In doing so, she reinforced the idea that credibility doesn't come from how well someone can argue. It comes from whether they live by the standards they demand from others. The lasting power of that moment lay in its universality. It wasn't just about two women in politics. It was about the broader struggle between reputation and reality. Crockett's reminder was clear. Credibility must be earned again and again, through consistency and self-awareness. And for Bondi, that message delivered not with anger but with clarity, offered an opportunity rather than an indictment. In the end, people remembered the quiet between the words, the stillness that followed Crockett's statement, the reflective pause from Bondi, and the understanding that settled over the room. It wasn't about who won the exchange. It was about what it revealed, that the measure of a person's credibility isn't found in how they defend their beliefs under pressure, but in how closely their words align with their past when no one is applauding. As the hearing faded into memory and headlines shifted toward other political stories, the exchange between Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett remained quietly significant. It didn't make waves because of confrontation or spectacle. It lingered because of what it revealed about honesty, leadership, and the rare courage it takes to reflect publicly. For once, the story wasn't about one side overpowering the other. It was about truth meeting perspective. Pam Bondi's expression in those final moments told its own story. She wasn't humiliated or defeated, she was processing. Years of defending justice, years of standing in front of microphones and cameras, had trained her to respond to pressure. But this was different. Crockett hadn't challenged her facts, she had challenged her principles, asking her to look inward rather than outward. And that challenge struck a chord. Bondi's silence wasn't weakness. It was the mark of someone realizing that growth doesn't stop, even after decades in the public eye. For Jasmine Crockett, the hearing was never about creating viral sound bites or winning a political battle. Her warning to Bondi that the truth always finds its way back wasn't personal. It was universal. It applied to everyone who has ever spoken of fairness but struggled to live it out fully. Her calm composure, her steady gaze, and her refusal to escalate the moment turned her words into something far more lasting than outrage. They became a reminder of what integrity actually looks like when tested. The world of politics is often filled with noise, loud debates, rehearsed speeches, and carefully crafted talking points. But what made this exchange different was its quiet authenticity. It was two people confronting the same ideal from different angles. And somewhere between their words, a truth emerged. Credibility isn't inherited or declared, it's maintained. And maintaining it requires a willingness to face uncomfortable questions, even when they come from someone across the aisle. Afterward, analysts, journalists, and viewers each took something different from the encounter. Some saw it as a moment of reckoning for Bondi. Others viewed it as an example of Crockett's rising influence, but the deeper lesson had little to do with political victory. It was about the human side of accountability, the realization that no matter how powerful, respected, or experienced someone may be, the principles they speak of must align with the actions they've taken. Pam Bondi's legacy, like anyone's, is a mix of accomplishments and controversies. But what happened that day offered her something rare, a chance for reflection, and in that reflection, there was dignity. Crockett didn't try to erase Bondi's career, she simply reminded her, and everyone watching, that real credibility endures only when one's convictions remain consistent under scrutiny. At asterisk, when the lights dimmed and the hearing room emptied, there was no dramatic conclusion, just quiet. Yet in that stillness, the impact of what had transpired became clear. It wasn't the end of a rivalry. It was the continuation of a conversation that needs to happen far more often, one about truth, humility, and the courage to look inward before speaking outward. In that sense, both women contributed something meaningful, Bondi, by allowing herself to reflect, and Crockett, by reminding her and the country that the measure of integrity lies not in how loudly we defend our beliefs, but in how honestly we